Mississippi is renowned for its rich literary culture, attracting readers, writers, and book lovers from far and wide each year to the annual Mississippi Book Festival. Right On Mississippi presents Matt Sawyer with Julia Phillips, author of Bear, a mysterious tale of two sisters whose day-to-day, mundane lives become unhinged when visited by a mysterious bear.
My book Bear is about two sisters whose lives are changed when a bear shows up at their front door, and it's pulled a lot of the elements and the original inspiration of it are pulled from a Grimm's Brothers fairy tale called Snow White and Rose Red that I loved as a kid. I was very into the Brothers Grimm as a kid. I had this collection that I would sort of tear through and carry around with me and drop in the bathtub and like rip the cover off by mistake. And did you read Brothers Grimm fairy tales when you were growing up?
I didn't.
You didn't?
And that's why this is so interesting.
Okay. Did you read any fairy tales or?
Yeah, but they didn't stick with me like they did, it seems, with you.
Well, I think the Brothers Grimm are particularly sticky. They're very violent a lot of times and like kind of horrible. I mean, horrific and scary. And they have all the classic fairy tale aspects, like they're short and they teach a lesson at the end. But what happens in those short little, instructional fairy tales are like somebody's head is chopped off by their stepmother and then, they are boiled and turned into a soup. It's like very shocking.
Yeah.
And I think it formed a lot of my personality and sensibilities going forward. And there was this one fairy tale called Snow White and Rose Red that was kind of a minor story. It's about two sisters who live in a cottage with their mother, and this bear comes to their door. But in the fairy tale, the bear is enchanted, and he comes every night, and they like roll around with him. And at the end, it turns out he's a prince in disguise, and Snow White marries him, and then her younger sister, Rose Red, marries his brother. And there were elements of this story that were so compelling to me for my whole life. Like, I just found it haunting and strange, this animal showing up, and them, the way they engaged with it, and the way it kept coming, and this kind of perversity and violence that was underlying it, but also the plot didn't make sense to me, I would say. I didn't really get it. There's this whole kind of side story with a dwarf and treasure and like an eagle. It was very confusing to me. And so I wanted with this story to really, by the time I started writing this book, it had been a long time since I'd been carrying the Brothers Grimm around with me. And I had kind of, this was 2021. I had a thing or two happen in the years between fairy tale time and 2021. I mean, like it was I would say not the best time for any of us, those recent years. And I just really felt like I was at the end of my rope kind of creatively and professionally and personally. And I was like, well, what am I doing? Like, how do I do it? And I've always loved to write, but I think I had lost sight of the fun of writing and the joy of writing. And this project was really a way for me to go back to that, to be like, well, what did I fall in love with in the first place? What were the things that obsessed me even as a kid? What were the things that compelled me so much? And this story was that. Yeah. So it's those sisters and their mother and the cottage and the bear, but in a very different story, in a very different narrative. Like the events are totally different, but I was trying to capture that fundamental excitement that I felt.
And you totally did. I think that's what the thing is, like the power was so generative that you were feeling it as you went along with the story. And that's why I couldn't stop, because I felt like, even though it was a strange attachment I have to this book. I'm not really sure why, in the way that maybe you don't with the fairy tales, but I just kept going and kept going. And I was like, I could tell you loved writing it. Yeah. And sometimes you can't feel that with a book.
Yes.
And it's way less of a satisfying experience because maybe now it's less about fun and it's more about the commercial enterprise of it all. I think some people lose that feeling of like, why did I even love a story when I was a kid? It's inexplicable. But to find that within yourself, you mentioned that this book helped you find yourself again.
Yes. Yes.
How so?
Much. Well, I mentioned the timing of this, and I do think it's really influential. It really shaped this object that was made. 2020, I think, was a challenging one for all of us in many different ways. One particular challenge in my life was a beautiful one, which was I had my first kid in June 2020. And I live in New York. So June 2020 was, in our experience of like lockdown and pandemic, was pretty intense time still, a pretty isolating time. And it was a really, it's hard for me to say, like, at that point, my book had come out, my debut novel had come out in 2019. So I'd had this kind of short period, like a 10-month period of having all my dreams come true. And then they just kind of stopped. They just stopped. Like, I didn't have a job anymore because my job had been for those preceding months, and with a lot of anticipation and preparation, like public facing. It had been a sort of, I got to go to bookstores and meet people and connect with people, and that was just over. It was completely over.
Yeah.
So then my job was to write, but my relationship to writing had totally changed, and my relationship to being in the world had totally changed. And I think I'm curious about what your experience was. Like, my experience of 2020 was all of a sudden, like, I thought this was an impossible situation. I wouldn't have even conceived of this situation. There was nothing.
It was an incredibly confusing time.
It was incredibly confusing.
And I made a huge mistake of getting in a relationship at that point.
Oh.
Which was even
some of those people are like marrying.
I know. That didn't happen for me. Ill-advised to I'm not meant to be in the same room with someone for that long. Truly. I just can't do that.
Well, who of us is? And who would even anticipate? I mean, we all talk about this now, but I remember so well being like, oh, this is going to be a couple crazy weeks. This is going to be a snow day is how we talked about it, right? In the Northeast, like, this is going to be a snow day. You're going to be home for 2 days. They're going to, metaphorically plow the roads, and then you're going to be done. And that was not, who knew we were going to be in a room with each other for that long? Yeah.
And who knew how that would make you feel and respond.
Oh,
and mine was
gosh.
not great. My general constitution is to move all the time.
Yeah.
And so in some ways it was good because then we just got to go to state parks and,
lovely.
Picnics on rivers all the time.
Yeah.
But in other ways, when you weren't doing that, I felt like, oh my gosh, I have to get out of here. So I definitely feel you. It's still really hard to understand.
It was really, it is still really hard to understand. It was so destabilizing. It like took normal away. And my relationship to art making or to words or to reading or to anything totally changed. Like, all of a sudden I was, instead of being the person I had come to know in a world that I'd known, I was a mom suddenly in like this totally unrecognizable reality. And it was really hard to write. It was really hard to write because what writing meant to me had totally changed. And coming to this story, it brought me back to myself, but it also, I think, bridged me into this new reality where I was like, I recognize myself here in a world I thought was unrecognizable. I am able to go into my imagination and play pretend and feel that like beautiful sort of private joy that I thought was totally inaccessible. Certainly in 2020, I didn't think it was accessible, but also I don't think I even knew it was accessible for years before that. I think I'd kind of lost track of it in the busyness and the ambition and the work and it was such a beautiful thing to get to rediscover.
Yeah, it felt undiscoverable for a lot of people, that joy. But one part of this book that really I felt like accelerated my interest in it and like deepened my connection to it was the dreaming part that you mentioned. The dreaming helped.
Yeah.
It had since they were children, worried about the answers to the questions no adults in their life would address. It helped them make sense of what they could not in everyday life fathom. When they were teens and their house became unbearable, they went out into the woods so they could lie on the cool earth between hemlock trees and imagine being elsewhere. Needles shivered over them. Meteors streaked across the sky. The moon, when it was full, was a hole in the darkness, an open door to another world. And it just feels like this was an open door to another world for you. This was where your imagination came to be. So talk about the role of dreaming between the two sisters, but also how one was dreaming to leave, which is dangerous in its own right.
Yes.
And the other was no longer dreaming in the same way. And that's where the bear comes in. So can you talk about their opposite experiences of this magical bear and dreaming?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to me, this is really the heart of the story. So these two sisters, Sam and Elena, Elena's the older one and Sam's the younger one. And they're not only sisters, they're roommates, they're best friends, like they're partners in so many significant ways. They're both in their late 20s, but their mom is sick and they still live in their childhood home, like as caretakers to her. And that mutual work has really bound them together. And it's also made them, I think, kind of like in the way you do in any long-term relationship, maybe take the other one for granted or think like, oh, I know this person. I understand them. They understand me. We don't need to talk about stuff or check in with each other because we get it. We get it. Which I think happens to a lot of us in our maybe in our sibling relationships or in our friendships or in our romantic relationships. Like you just sort of lose track of the other person, then you come back together, and lose track of the other person, come back together, even if you're living in the same house the whole while. And Sam and Elena have these very different ways of dealing with the world. This is part of their sort of going apart. Sam is really a dreamer and spends a lot of time thinking about what things are going to be like later. And this is something I really, 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 Sam and I have a lot of overlap in this.
I was wondering.
A lot of overlap in this.
I felt almost like concerned how much I related to Sam. So like, I was wondering if you also were like inhabiting Sam in that way.
Oh, Matt, you and I had a very similar experience of this book, I have to tell you. Yes, I think to some folks, the way Sam, not everyone overlaps with her in that way, I'll say, which was a surprise to me because I feel so immersed in her way of being in the world. And so much of the joy of writing was sort of plunging into her way of being, which is not so different from my way of being. She really, to get through today, she really spends a lot of time thinking about like, well, tomorrow things will be different, or soon things are going to change. And certainly just from, we were talking before about the dream of writing coming true, like that was my way of being in the world. That was my experience of ambition, I'll say. My experience of ambition was like, I'm doing this now, but what I'm really thinking about is that later things are going to be amazing. I'm like dreaming about later. And every night when I would go to bed, I would shut my eyes and literally like think about a future where all my dreams came true. And that would soothe me to sleep. That was the bedtime story I told myself. Which, as you say, like always imagining being elsewhere or doing something else has a real cost to it. And you don't, you lose the present in a lot of ways if you are always thinking about the future. And when the bear shows up, Sam's reaction to this huge change in the present is one of terror, because she's like, you're endangering the dream. I have a dream and you're about to take it away. It's a change that is like brutal and terrifying to her. Elena, meanwhile, is, I think, really focused on the present. Elena's like working really hard on the day-to-day. She has a lot of responsibility in their household. She's basically the head of their entire household. And she really can't lose herself in the same way that Sam does, because she has a lot to deal with now.
She doesn't have time to dream. Really.
She doesn't have time to dream, and she doesn't have space to dream. And the way that Sam, maybe this is an older sibling, younger sibling thing, but Sam can just say like, oh, my older sister will take care of it. But Elena doesn't have anyone to take care of things other than her. She's the one who has to take care of things. So when the bear comes, the bear is that change that the bear brings to the everyday is so meaningful to her, because it can actually, it's like an ecstatic experience. It can actually take her out of and take some of the pressure off today, because it's so exciting and so different.
Yeah, it was when that interruption of the bear in their lives, just the way that they immediately, their natural response to it was so polarizing. And when I think about Elena, like, she saw the magic and the wonder because she had to. There was nowhere else in her mind that she was ever going to go.
Yeah.
So this represented like, hey, there is wonder and beauty in the everyday. And she's mad at Sam because Sam can't appreciate that, but because Sam doesn't want to. She doesn't want to be stuck. And in the same way, it just feels like you didn't want to be stuck where you were. And so that's why I wonder deep down if like Sam was, there was that yearning within you, like this book was helping you get to that unstuck point. Whereas Elena was like fine with being stuck at this point. So she's seeing this wonder. It's like, what a gift. That one scene where she is trying to convince Sam.
Yes.
Like, don't you see, like, this is magical.
I know she's so plain about it. And she just really declares herself. She says like, this is magic. Yeah. This is the best
Lucky us
thing. Like, this is so incredible. And can't you just appreciate it? And she really makes her case for how important it is to have something in your day, in your actual day, that's real, that is exciting and that matters to you. And Sam just isn't in a place where she can hear that. Yes.
And I just think it shows they're so lonely.
Yes.
In this book. And I think that's what made me the most emotional reading it is there's the distrust that grew in them of authority.
Yes.
Is something that so many people have because they never feel like everyone's going to let them down is how they feel.
And everyone has let them down.
And now even the opportunities they have where someone might pull through and help them and save them from their situation, they can't trust it. But do you blame them? No. Yeah. And so the loneliness is punishing in this story. And it shows that we have a long way to go to like show people we care and like to build these communities where folks don't feel like they're completely on their own economically and even just emotionally, like no friends really, like who do you trust in this story if you're them? Yeah. It is just them. And that even causes the tension because there's no one else to go to. So I just really appreciate that you talked about this because it's something that most of us experience, and I wish we're different.
Yeah, I have to say, like, for anyone who hasn't experienced it, it's only a matter of time, right? I mean, this is it. I think this is life here, now.
Yeah, it's kind of bleak.
It's kind of bleak.
but there was really. I want to talk about the end of this book. Yeah. Because, and you did talk about this with Seth Meyers. Mm-hmm. And this was the part where I was like, okay, we would hang out and laugh a lot because you talked about this quote, but the end of the story, in memory, Sam took away any suffering and gave Elena glory instead. You frame glory really interesting at the end of this book. And I don't want to give anything away. But can you describe what is glorious about the end of this book and how in your head you were able yourself to write the suffering away. Yeah. And make the story glorious.
Yes. Yes. We talked about the bleakness, we talked about the sadness, we talked about the struggle and like the day-to-day difficulty of what they're going through. I think what we're all going through, like, there's a lot of times, there's a lot of hours in our day that are tough, that are really tough. And whether like financially or socially or, personally and all sorts of different things. I think we go through tough times and they can last a long time. But there are also these moments of ecstasy or awe or glory is a perfect word for it, I think. These moments where you're able to sort of step out of or step away from, or just like release the burden of your situation and feel for a moment like sublime or connected or overwhelmed with joy or grateful to be alive, or just be like, I can't believe that, I get to exist in the world right now. How happy am I? And I think that Elena, for example, is able to access that. She's able to access that feeling of awe and reverence and ecstasy in a very unusual way. I wouldn't recommend her method, but
yeah, it was unsettling the way that she found joy and ecstasy.
But she found it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I don't know. I think I would recommend chasing that, if perhaps in less unsettling ways, but I would recommend to anyone chasing that because it's really meaningful in so many ways. It can keep us going, having that idea.
Yeah, you wish that for Sam.
Yeah.
There was that one moment early in the book when she saw the bear and she was reflecting on it and she said to herself, sometimes I do see beauty.
Yes.
Sometimes I am lucky.
Yes.
And
Yes,
it felt
this
like
little
the
moment.
whole book, I was
Yes.
hoping she found that more and she didn't. But that was the lesson to me, is like she could have still had the dream, but that moment she could have recognized more and not missed so much of the beauty.
There's a moment where Elena and Sam are sort of arguing about the bear, and Elena says to Sam, and I'm going to misquote myself here, but she says something like, it makes me feel alive. It makes me feel totally, totally alive, completely alive. Like, have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt really totally alive? And then Sam afterwards is at work, and she's with this guy that she's seeing, and she says, like, well, don't I feel alive right now? Isn't this being alive?
Yeah.
And it's not in the way that Elena means. And I think at the end of the book, when she thinks about glory, she's not yet able to access it, maybe totally, but she sees that it's there. She sees it's possible. And I think there's a lot of hope in that.
Yeah.
In its own way.
What was the way you framed it? There was seeing something that would delight.
Yes.
I'm curious how this book helped you with that. Coming out of COVID and all the struggle, how did writing this help you find those some things that would delight?
So much. So much. Sometimes I since I've been lucky enough to have this book out in the world, I've had folks ask me, like, what does the bear mean? The bear in the book. What does the bear represent? What does it carry? What does it mean? Like, sort of, what's the metaphorical meaning? And I don't know what it means to each individual reader, but to me, this book, Bear, the book, was the bear for me. I mean, that feeling of this unexpected visitation that was so powerful, so ecstatic, so delightful, that was the writing of this book for me. It made me feel I had an extraordinarily wonderful and positive experience with the release of my first book. It was 5 years ago now. And it was a fantastic, no complaints for me. It was wonderful. But I wanted so badly for that book to impress people, I wanted so badly for someone to say, like, you're good at this. You get an agent, you get a publishing deal. I had a previous manuscript that was in a drawer. I just wanted to be A++ and gold star. And that pressure was too much that I put on myself in the writing of it. And then when that book came out, I thought, well, now I have to do even better. I have to do even better. I have to be A+++ and 4 gold stars. And another manuscript went into a drawer. And by the time I got to the writing of this book, it was the most wonderful release to just say, I don't know, like, it's not for me to know. I don't know what is good or what connects with a reader or what gets good grades, or there's no rubric here.
Hey, how would you know? It's impossible.
It's impossible.
It is literally an impossible task because
and it would never be. It was what happened before was luck, and what's happening now, I can't control luck. So I just want to have a good time, and this book let me have a good time. Let me have the best time in a way that I didn't even know was possible. And it was just wonderful. It was wonderful. I really, the idea that you read in one day, it really, I can't tell you how happy that makes me, because it was such an ecstatic experience to write.
I'm telling you, I was like, who is this? How did she write this and why? Because I look, I read a lot, but I'm a pretty slow reader.
Yeah.
And I like to take my time with things because I don't want to miss things.
Yeah, of course.
But it was that idea of carving out a whole day. It also reminded me the great benefit of having that kind of day.
Yes.
Where I like hardly left my porch or my couch, and I didn't once think about, what am I missing in the world?
Yes.
What productive thing could I be doing instead? That was the best thing to be doing at that moment. And so that story just took me into, I'd assume, the feeling you had writing it, where you're just
exactly how I felt writing it.
You're immersed in the story, you're invested in the story. And like I said, I might have related to one character or another more, but all of them to me, there was something that was keeping me there, and I wanted to know what was going to happen. And so it was a really, really beautiful book. And like, I'm telling you, Willa Cather and Eudora Welty are like my two faves.
This makes me so happy.
So the fact that I've never even read a Eudora book in one day is, ask anyone around town. They know I'm obsessed with Eudora Welty, and I still couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
So it was it was a huge joy. And so I'm really
happy.
glad you found that again. It's so nice to, you know, I root for other people. Like I root for writers that are good people to find that for themselves, because writing's so hard and it's so lonely. And if you focus so much on what the outcome's going to be with all these faceless people you'll never meet, you're really wasting your life, and you're wasting your gift, which is not to try to give this faceless, nebulous crowd something that's going to earn points or what, because that is impossible. It's to give us the best of yourself. And I feel like you did that in this book.
That means so much to me. That was the feeling I had, was that I was finding something thrilling. And I don't know, I think the experiences I had before in my career and my writing, they were focusing experience, and they were, I mean, you know, Sam in this book, as an example, like, is very, very focused. She keeps her eye on the prize, for better or for worse. And I think it ended up in my recent past for better. I mean, that was great to be that focused. How lucky was I that I got that, you know, sort of space to expend that focus or turn that focus towards something that I was proud of and that felt good. But after a while, that focus just like, to what end? To what end are you doing that?
It's been an absolute honor to talk to you.
This has been so wonderful, so joyful. My cheeks hurt from smiling so much. I'm so happy and so grateful to you.